Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. We're now joined by the Economy Magazine correspondent, Daniel Roth. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And with us also is I-24 News correspondent, Danny Zweibel. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
But Daniel, we'll start with you. What do you have for us?
First things first, I don't know if everyone around the world knows this, but Israel just passed its budget,
right.
Its 2015-2016 budget, after about a year of having no budget,
right.
working on a month-to-month
We're good at that.
basis. So it's huge news here and will actually have a lot of effect on the international scene, as we'll see.
And let's take a look at this following report that you prepared.
Late last week, after more than 12 hours of overnight voting and deep schisms, Israel passed its 2015-2016 budget. The total amount sits at over $200 billion for the two-year allocation, which sets a nearly 3% deficit as percentage of GDP, which could mean an increase in the debt-to-GDP ratio for the first time since the global financial crisis. The budget, which passed by a razor-thin vote of 61 to 59, sees the Ministry of Education get a $1.7 billion infusion and the Health Ministry get just over $1 billion more than it had been working with. But much of the focus in the Knesset was on an item that was supposed to compel the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population of Israel to serve in the army, but which was postponed at least until 2023, a cause for debate.
My son's defense minister, his highest commander, has sold him out over all sorts of coalition agreements.
The way to get to equality is not through force. It's not through a law that threatens to send military police to drag out yeshiva students.
Meanwhile, the Joint List Party, made up primarily of Arab members of parliament, called the budget racist and criticized the ballooning defense portfolio, as well as the focus on settlements. For example, the Education Ministry's nearly $20 million to provide security for settlements around East Jerusalem. But Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon sees the budget as being a major win for those in need.
If, when I was a kid, Yair Lapid or somebody that cuts child welfare subsidies was finance minister, I wouldn't have shoes. Nor would I have a backpack or new clothes.
Israel has been running for nearly a year without a budget, with the government operating on a month-to-month framework based on the previous year's spending. The passage of this financial plan sets up the current government to stay in place at least through 2017 without coming apart due to budget-centered infighting.
So it's important, of course, to note, as you said, that this has been the budgetless country for the past year. And now with this new budget, it's going to have big implications on certain sectors of society.
Big time. It's a very good budget for certain sectors, very bad for other sectors. And as I said, that will impact the international scene. I think, first of all, you see that settlers and ultra-Orthodox in certain ways are getting big boosts. So, for example, when we say that there's a huge influx into the education ministry of money, it sounds really
right.
good on the surface, but then when you start digging into where that money's going, an enormous amount of it is going to the division of Jewish settlement, to East Jerusalem security for settlements, and you start to ask yourself, what does it mean when this money's going to the education ministry? And you start
right.
to dig in and you
who's
wonder...
heading the education ministry right now? And this is part of, as you said, it's doing very good for some certain parts of the government. It's important also to note this government is a very narrow government. It's a representative of only, I mean, if you look at it largely, only of half of the Israeli population,
yeah.
and largely underrepresented of other sectors of society. And one of the biggest, I would say, losers of this budget, if you will, is the centrist parties, which in the past election really rose to the front lines.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've seen since March, when this coalition began to be put together, that the centrist parties were going to sit outside for the most part. Some people refer to Moshe Kahlon's party as the new Yair Lapid party, that is the new centrist focused on the budget party. There's a lot of other people who look and say, well, actually, when you look at a budget like this, the 2015-2016 budget, you see them giving up an enormous amount of so-called centrist policies, such as compelling all of the ultra-Orthodox to go to the army. So it's hard to say who really represents the center, but actually what we've seen is the classic center, the secular center, and the sort of Tel Avivi center is on the outside.
And of course, that brings me to the cost of living, which is always a debate in economics, but also in politics. That is, everyone's fighting for it to be, the patron of the cost of living. And this budget, there will be those that says here we're dealing with the very high cost of living in Israel by, allocating larger child allowances and whatnot. But it doesn't help the cost of living for those secular families in terms of housing. It doesn't address the housing crisis. It doesn't address
the
gas deal
are going
and so
up.
Right.
Up all the time. Housing prices are going up.
Right. Will it bring the secular people, and this is the million-dollar question, back to the streets the way we saw in 2011?
It's hard to say. 2011 was enormous. 500,000 people took to the streets to call on something. That there was a moment there. It's very hard to say. The gas crisis, the question of whether private or public concerns will control the huge gas finds in this country, that has been bringing people out to the streets, nowhere near the numbers of 2011, but certainly in the thousands, and it's growing. People are getting more and more angry, and now that they see a budget on the table, we may see people a line's been drawn by the government. We may see the citizens pick a side of that line.
And another summit that is quite less rowdy, I would say, than what happened in the Knesset is ASEAN Summit, the meeting of Southeast Asian nations, mainly to talk about economy. The President of the United States was there, but there was another thing going on in the background.
Yes. So in the least. It's conference season. I don't know if people know that, but this time of year is conference season. The G20 met, APEC, ASEAN, in a couple of weeks, the COP21, the climate summit. It's summit season. The big question is if all of these ostensibly economic focused partnerships will be focused on economy, and so far the answer is no, especially since Paris, but just in general, we've seen more and more talk about primarily security, primarily terrorism, and then also sort of touching into free trade agreements, but always coming back to security and terror. And particularly since Paris, we've seen we're on our third of 4 major conferences, the ASEAN conference. And again, it was, these are partnerships that are entirely placed around economic partnership that just delve into this issue of terror.
And of course, as you said, the new climate change summit is the next big conference, should we say, of world leaders. The Israeli Prime Minister is going to go. And as you say correctly, I am doubtful that climate change will be the first thing that these world leaders will be speaking about.
Absolutely, and it's a big risk. Naomi Klein and Josh Box in the New Yorker spoke about in 2008. They wrote about this, that in 2008 everyone was focused on climate. We were about to get there with an international deal, and then the economic collapse happened, and all of the eyes went to the economy. And now the question is whether we can get back to climate, or whether we're going to lose focus on economy, lose focus on climate, and now we're going to be focused entirely on terror and security.
Back on terror and security.
Right.
Daniel, thank you for joining us.